he asked me once, he said, Ritu, how do you feel now? And I said, I feel better. But I still feel very conscious because every time I speak, I feel everybody's just looking at me and, everybody's listening. And he said, why do you think that is? I said, maybe I sound different or maybe I look different. He said, exactly. And he said, that is your superpower because 5 people before have just spoken in the same way. And here you stand up and you speak in a different way, and people actually lean in to listen.
Welcome to Future Fit Leadership, a podcast for leaders at every stage who want to stay relevant in a world that keeps changing. Leadership has shifted. The pace is faster, the expectations are higher, and the future is calling for a different kind of leader. One who is human-centered, grounded, and able to balance capability with empathy. These conversations bring together global perspectives on the skills and mindsets that help people and organizations thrive. Hello and welcome to Future Fit Leadership. I hope wherever you are listening to this podcast, you are well. Imagine being in your early 20s and boarding your first international flight, leaving India for the United States with no real idea of what to expect. There's no social media, no roadmap, just nerves, ambition, and a new environment waiting on the other side. Early in her career at GE Capital, Ritu Mehrish found herself in rooms where she stood out. Her accent, her background, her way of communicating, all of it was different. And during one of her first presentations to senior leaders, she felt that difference clearly. And afterwards, a senior leader gave her advice that shaped how she would lead. You stand out because you are different. That is your strength. Don't change it. That moment became a turning point, not just in confidence, but in how she approached leadership across global teams and cultures. In this episode, we talk to Ritu about what leadership looks like when you are working across countries, cultures, and constant change. We unpack the idea of leaders' blocks, the moment where leaders get stuck, lose perspective, or question their directive. Ritu explains why this is not failure, but part of the leadership cycle, and shares really practical ways to move through it. We also discuss the reality for new leaders stepping into roles without the right support. Many continue to operate as individual contributors, holding onto the work they know instead of shifting into leading others. It is one of the most common reasons leaders struggle early. This is also a clear conversation around women in leadership across Asia. Cultural expectations, language, and visibility shape how women are perceived and how they contribute. Ritu shares insights from speaking with more than 200 women leaders, including the need for leaders to create space for different voices and not mistake silence for lack of capability. Looking ahead, while the environment continues to shift, the fundamentals remain consistent. Clear communication, adaptability, empathy, the ability to adjust course and say when something is not working. Please enjoy this conversation with Ritu Mehrish. Hello, Ritu. Welcome to Future Fit Leadership. How are you?
I'm good, Sadhna. Thank you. How are you?
Very good. Welcome to the program all the way from Singapore today.
That's correct. It's lovely to be speaking to somebody all the way in Australia, though I must say Australia feels really close to Singapore compared to other places.
Well, it is. I mean, it's usually a big stopover for all of us when we travel to Europe or other parts of the world. I know that I always choose to stop over in Singapore because I love the food, I love Singapore, and I love the shopping. So, it ticks all my boxes. But I want to start because you've worked across India, Singapore, and many other countries. So you're a global leader. What were some of the early experiences from when, your upbringing that you feel shaped the leadership course you ended up on?
You're right. I was born, studied till I was in my early 20s. I was in India. I started working in India actually as a financial analyst for Procter and Gamble, actually Gillette, which is now Procter and Gamble. And then in my early 20s, I moved to the US to work with GE Capital. And I think those 2-3 years really shaped me as somebody who had just started working, somebody as a leader. Then I call myself a global citizen because I have lived and worked in many, many places. So I think for me, if I were to look back rather than my childhood, it is those early 2-3 years in the US that really shaped me as a leader. And also in India that time, I'm talking late 99s, things were just opening up. All the multinationals had come in. I had started working for a multinational. So there was this whole boom period, and which when I went to the US was eye-opening at all levels. That was my first international flight, and that was to go and work with GE Capital. So it was quite nerve-wracking, but something.
That would have been a massive cultural shock at the age of 20, coming out of India, going, as you said, your first international flight. What was that like?
Yes. It is, even now when I talk, I get these goosebumps. I still remember very clearly, I was in this Austrian Airways flight. So my first halt was Vienna, and I came out of the airport thinking, oh my God, like, what is this? And then I landed in Atlanta. But, the experience of US was, now when I talk about it, people say, yeah, so big deal, because we have all these social media and everything. That time, I didn't know what to expect. Right. So when I landed at the airport, just the size of everything was a big change. And then when I got to workplace culture, in terms of the way I spoke, which still has a very prominent accent, but yes, it stood out. My accent stood out. The way I looked stood out. Everything. But I will say, Sadhna, one of the things, maybe it's you're naive when you're young, and which is a good thing, is I knew that I could get through if I really did my job well. So I relied a lot on my smartness, so to say, of saying I will really do well here. And which actually the next 2 years became like that I almost started in the office. I started becoming like this rising young star because I just did everything so well. Now, there was one episode which I actually write about even in my book, which kind of shaped who I would become really as a leader, or how I became confident in who I was my first job was to work in GE Capital had this regulatory reporting division. Basically, it operated like a bank. So we had to do all these quarterly reports and, submit to the bank. So I used to work with the president actually of that bank within GE. He was really a very, what you call like future looking leader, because he got me, I used to work with him closely. I used to prepare all the reports and he used to present, but he used to always get me in those meetings when he was presenting to all the business heads. And after a few quarters, he said, Ritu, I want you to present this time. And even now when I think of that moment when he told me, I was like, no, Don, like, I can't present. He's like, why not? You've been preparing all these reports. Why can't you present? Anyway, long story short, I presented in the first one. I fumbled. I wasn't perfect, but he backed me up. By the second or third quarter, he asked me once, he said, Ritu, how do you feel now? And I said, I feel better. But I still feel very conscious because every time I speak, I feel everybody's just looking at me and, everybody's listening. And he said, why do you think that is? I said, maybe I sound different or maybe I look different. He said, exactly. And he said, that is your superpower because 5 people before have just spoken in the same way. And here you stand up and you speak in a different way and people actually lean in to listen. He said, don't change that.
Great advice. Great advice.
It was like life-changing for me. After that, I have lived in the US, I lived in UK, I lived in Ireland, I've lived now in Singapore for 10 years. I have just maintained the same accent. Of course, it just changes a bit, but just keeping his advice in mind, saying, yeah, I don't have to change who I am.
So as you've just mentioned, you've lived in many, many countries and you've clearly led global teams. What were some of the lessons that you've learnt from global teams that you can share with us?
So there was lesson number 1. In my last role, like as you said, I led really, I had teams sitting in 8 countries. So I had teams in Mexico, Guatemala, all the way to Dalian in China, in Hungary, Poland. One thing I realized, Sadhna, over the years is that irrespective of where they come from, irrespective of, their background, everything, there are few factors that are common across all humans. Family, one. Like that's a thread. You can talk to anybody in the world and you can get them together by talking about family. Food, food is the other thing, is like everybody loves to talk about their food, the commonality. The third was that if you understood what ambition or what progress meant for them, and you give them that, I think that works. And that also works differently for different parts of the world and different teams. For somebody sitting in China, it could mean very different from what that progress or that incentive could look like for somebody sitting in the UK, for example, or somebody in Mexico, right? So once you understand what does progress and aspiration and motivation mean for that set of team or that set of person, then you can really lead those people effortlessly.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting because, post-COVID, we've all started talking about distributed leadership and managing
Yes,
people from a hybrid perspective, not coming into the office or, in different countries.
correct.
And you've been doing it for many, many years.
That's correct. And in fact, I always say my boss and me never sat in the same location for the at least 10 years of my career. We
Mm.
never sat in the same place. And my teams were never in the same place. I could only be in one place and I had a part of the team there, but otherwise they were all scattered. So this was the norm before even COVID came
Before
for
even
me.
COVID hit. Now, you
Yeah.
talk about leader's block and you've written a book about it.
Hmm.
Tell me more about what is leader's block?
Yeah. And I'll give you a little backstory of how I came up with this leaders block. During my career, I had seen many leaders who were really good getting stuck at some point in time, including me. I
Mm.
went through a couple of such episodes in my career, some early on, even some later, even some mid. So I knew, that. So one thing I knew for sure is that leaders cannot perform at a linear pace all the time. Like 20, 30 years, you can't just be straight line. They are going to be bumps during
Hmm.
that journey. And everybody says leadership is a journey. And if you look at any journey, whether it's through air, through sea, through roads, they're always bumps, right? Like, there are bumps. And similarly, if leadership is a journey, there will be bumps, and which we all know. But I think for me, the biggest insight was that when leaders go through these blocks or go through these bumps, what do they do? Who do they reach out to? Who do they ask for advice without feeling any shame or without feeling embarrassed about it?
Or
Um,
threatened, because
or
sometimes,
threatened.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, when you are going through a bump, if you go and talk, you need to know that whoever you go and talk to is actually going to support you, not judge you or use it against you.
absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, Sadhna, somebody said to me when I was interviewing for this book, they were like, "Oh, if I went and told my HR I'm going through a leader's block, first thing they're going to do is to start looking for a backup
Mm,
for me, right?"
mm.
So you're right. So one of the things I realized, if we were to talk about these bumps or these blocks, we have to give it a name. And I realized that just as best of writers have gone through writer's block and have produced some of their best work after they've gone through writer's block, I thought, okay, leaders go through leaders block and they come out of it and go on to become a much better version of themselves. So really wanting to create that space where leaders, one, we could have a name for if I'm going through something, I can say, oh, I think I'm going through a leader's block. And more importantly, normalize it. So for my book, I went and spoke to about 100 leaders across the globe saying, have you had a phase like this? And they all said yes. What was the reason? But then what did they do to overcome that, right? So we give it a name, we normalize it, and then we also say that these are 5 ways you can overcome leaders block.
So what are some of those ways? I mean, I'm assuming that when you coach leaders through a leader's block, there are some practical steps that they can take. Could you share some of that with us?
So one of them is, and like anybody who's writing a book, you come up with an acronym. So I came up with an acronym of 5 ways to come up to get over leaders block. Is actually the word block. You can use that to unblock yourself. So the word B stood for big picture. Very often than not, when we are stuck or when we are blocked, we really zoom into a problem, because that's how the problem becomes like all consuming. We think,
Mm.
oh, that's the biggest problem in the world. But when you step out, or when you zoom out and you start to look at the big picture, that how will this particular problem matter to me in 10 months, 10 years, 10 minutes from now, suddenly you get a different perspective, right? So zooming out. And as a coach, that's a very common thing I do with the leaders, or in fact, I get them to do. If they look at a problem, I'm like, okay, let's do 10, 10, 10. 10 days from now, how important is this problem going to be? 10 months from now or 10 years from now, will you be talking about the problem? And if it's not, after 10 months, it's not going to be important to you, then it's not that big a deal, you know? So it's putting things in perspective, basically. So that's the first one. The second one is the difficult one to do. Sometimes the best thing to do is let it go. You know, that thing that you're really holding on to, that job that you're really miserable in, and you're holding on to it, let it go, because you're not happy, your employer is not happy, what you're producing you know, is not a happy product or process. Then maybe go and look for something else, right? Maybe within the same organization, or maybe just look for another job. But letting go of things, because you can't control everything, and the minute you kind of, you know, understand that, it becomes easy. The third advice I always tell people is to find a board of advisors, right? Find people who are going to be your sounding board, who are going to be listening to you without judging, who will also offer advice. And you need to find different categories. In fact, one leader told me very beautifully, she said, on my board of advisors, Ritu, I have, you know, my 20-year-old daughter, like 20-something-year-old daughter. I have my best friend from school. And then I have these two people who'd been my mentors through my career, right? So very different perspective, but sometimes you need that, because, you know, you know this, right? The whole echo chamber. If you just kind of surround yourself with the same people, you're going to hear the same thing.
Same
So just
things.
getting different perspective, right? So those are top three that that are there. You know,
That's
is
great
how
advice.
you overcome. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, personally, I can get stuck on things. Like if something happens,
Yeah.
you almost obsess about it till you fix it.
Yes.
And it's really hard to step back for the 10 minutes
Yeah.
or 10 months and
Yeah.
actually ask yourself that question. And letting it go is almost, when you're in that mode, letting go is almost impossible to do.
I agree.
But that's where your tribe comes in, to have some of those
That's right.
conversations, and they do tell you to let it go. And eventually, you know, you can work your way
Absolutely.
through it. But
Yes.
as you were speaking, I'm like, I can see myself go through all of those phases.
That's correct. The other thing is you know, the tribe is good, but also use this tribe to give you feedback, which can be really brutal and honest. Sometimes we don't ask for it. People don't tell us because we don't ask for it, right? Like if you
That's
were to
true.
go and ask
Yeah.
5 people that you know to give you feedback, not generic, saying, hey, how do you think I'm doing, or how do you think I'm as a leader? No, like something very specific. You know, that meeting that I went to, how did you think I did there? Or, you know, at this particular something negotiation, how did you think I do? Like something very specific, because then people can give you specific feedback.
Let's talk about some new emerging leaders.
Mm-hmm.
Most new leaders will, you know, well, 40% of the stats tell us will fail within 18 months, and often because they take that misstep too early. They may be inexperienced, they don't have the support, they've been thrown into a job they don't really know how to do, and no one's mentoring them. In your experience, what's the most common traps that new leaders fall into in that first 90 days?
That's a really good question. Few things. So one, when that leader becomes a new leader, like, you know, typically I see somebody who's been, especially in tech firms, I see that a lot, is that, you know, you've been an individual contributor, you're really good, you know, you have these solid skills that you come with, and now, you know, you've been doing so well, you get promoted to become a leader, or you become promoted to lead a team. And first thing that I see leaders fail, the reason why they fail is they continue to be that individual contributor. They continue to hang on to the stuff they know. And of course, they'll know it better than their team. So they kind of want to look smart, right? Because they know the stuff. But that is the biggest mistake. Because now you have a team, you have to, one, shift your mindset that what worked for you earlier, or the things that you got credit for earlier, you are not going to get credit for that now. Your success doesn't depend on how well you do a job. It depends on how well you lead the team to do the job. So it's very different skills. And very often, even organizations fail there because they have the right intentions. So they'll promote the person, but they'll not invest in making sure that this person lands very well and is given these skills and, you know, tools and frameworks to make sure that the person succeeds, because it's a different skill set. So I would say that's number one that I see a lot of leaders. In fact, I run a program called Critical Quarter, which is for organizations, for people who are becoming new leaders. How do they, in the first quarter, how do they succeed? What are the 4 or 5 things they need to do? And one of the thing is the mindset. The second one is obviously learning how do you work out the team dynamics? How do you start to talk to stakeholders? How do you kind of come up with early wins? And I will say one other thing is that I see even in more senior leaders, whenever you take on a new role or a bigger role, you tend to want to come in and change everything, because you want to establish yourself. And sometimes that's not the best
It's not the
strategy,
best
because
way
for the
to do.
exactly, because
Yeah.
for the team, it's the same team, right? For them, suddenly a new person and wanting to change everything, too much change, and
Yeah.
nobody likes change.
What about credibility and trust? What's the best way? Because that's the other piece, is when you're new
Yes.
and building that credibility and trust, particularly if,
Yeah.
it may be that you are required to make changes. How do you
Yeah.
build that quickly in that first quarter?
I look at this in a couple of ways, right? You build credibility firstly by ensuring you have the expertise, right? So one, you can build credibility by the expertise and the experience you have, because that's what you bring to the table, and you showcase that in a way of I have done this, I know it, kind of thing, right? So people know, okay, there's a leader who knows this stuff. Now, sometimes it may not be all the technical stuff, but it could be you've led similar stuff, or you've been part of a similar project. So one is your expertise, right? Secondly is your reliability. Initially, if somebody's come to you, you've said you'll do it, do you do it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the thing. And the third is, how much do you focus on yourself versus the other person or the team? And they all sound simple, but actually, trust is such an ambiguous thing, right? So I would say these are 2, 3 very quick ways to do that. Listen to people more, show your expertise, but just keep it aside, and then do whatever you've said. If you've said, oh, I'm going to come back to you in 2 weeks' time, or let me check and come back, do that. Even if it's your own team, or even if it doesn't have to be always a senior person, but do that. Yeah.
Now, you've written another book. It's called Rewrite the Rules, which is where you've interviewed over 200 Asian women leaders. And I'm really interested in talking to you about this, because I guess my first question around this is, when you spoke to this women, what were the unique challenges that the Asian women leaders were facing in comparison to their Western counterparts?
So, a few things. One, the whole cultural thing. And the backstory on this is because, even though I have worked, actually, my big part of my working life has been outside Asia, but I've always had roots. And then now I've been in Singapore for the last 10 years. So I work with a lot of regional teams, which are Asians mainly. And one of the things I had realized is that a lot of programs that companies were bringing in, a lot of the leaders who were coming from the US, UK, or Australia, they were bringing in programs that worked there, and they were replicating the same programs here. Right. And sometimes they were not, most often than not, there were parts of it which were not effective because people couldn't relate to it. Right. So it was few challenges and also opportunities. Actually, both, I would say, came out. So some of the challenges were the cultural challenges. We're still Asia, and I'm painting Asia as one big unit, but it's not. But broadly, I think culturally it's still evolving into a more equal society, so to say. So there is that little fight for more is still there. So culturally, women are expected to do better in certain roles. I expected to kind of, take care of home, take care of the children. Caretaking is a big thing. Again, a big thing of Asia is that, in a lot of countries, kids are still taking care of their elderly parents. So that all falls typically on the women. So that is one, right? Expecting to do this and that. The other thing is also certain countries more than the other in Asia still very patriarchal, right? So that's the cultural part. Then there's socioeconomic. Within Asia, there is such divides when it comes to socioeconomic factors, right? Depends where you're coming from. For a lot of women that I interviewed, they were like the first in their families to actually achieve what they were achieving, or to work their way through to senior leadership. They were the first ones. They didn't have anybody else in their family who had done that before. The other, Sadhana, is very interesting that people don't often think about is language. Like really smart leaders whom I interviewed sitting in Thailand, sitting in Taiwan, sitting in Korea, right? Like really smart. They know their stuff. They've done so well. But then when they talk to a stakeholder who's a native English speaker, it's challenging because that's not their first language. So when they think, or when they're trying to kind of, translate what they're thinking into English, of course, it impacts their executive communication, executive presence, all of those things, which then leaders come and tell me, is that, oh, this person is ready, but she doesn't have executive presence. Like, okay, how do you judge executive presence? Oh, she doesn't speak too much in meetings. Yes, because she is translating in a second language. Things like that, right? Like, which are generally factors that one doesn't think about. So those are the things that came up.
And then you talk about the visibility paradox, where women are judged for being too assertive or too quiet, which links into what you've just been talking about. Because, and you're right, like, I'm Indian, but I was lucky. I was brought up in a household that allowed me to have a voice, an opinion, debate. Like, we had great debates and conversations around our dining table from when I was a little girl. And so I was never told that my voice wasn't important, or I wasn't, never asked not to participate. But there are many households where that is not the case. So then you get into the workplace and it's actually hard to have that assertive voice. So how do you help women navigate this environment? And on the flip side, how do you get businesses to bring these women out in their organizations as well?
Correct. So there is this part, and before I answer that, I do want to add, the other thing is that also the benefit actually of being a woman leader in Asia was the ecosystem, right? Most of the families here, even if you had kids, have your extended family to support. There is affordable childcare. We can get helps. We can come and get somebody to come and help us with the household work or with children, whatever. So that's the other thing that I tell women leaders here, is that tap into that. Like, we are on that, we have that advantage, which is available in the West, but it comes at a price, like at a really steep price. And whereas for leaders here, it's affordable. Right. So that's a big advantage, I think. The point about visibility, you're right. So there is the part that I tell women leaders is that do something, and that's why the title of the book is Rewrite the Rules, is you do what feels authentic to you. Find ways. After COVID, especially, the whole digital space is opened up, right? You don't necessarily, visibility doesn't mean you need to go and speak in big conferences or in big meetings, right? You can make your visibility through being, if you want to say something, there's so many digital platforms. Leverage that, practice in smaller stake meetings, and then start to speak up. So there are a few things that I tell them, but I also actually coach leaders within the organization, saying that if you are a leader who's leading a team of, and I'm talking women leaders specifically here, women leaders who are from across the region, allow them space and time in meetings. Like, you don't need to be, say a question and 30 seconds you expect somebody to give an answer. Pull the person who's been quiet on the Zoom call, saying, hey, what's your point of view? Or, hey, Kathy, do you want to add something, right? So be more intentional, and don't necessarily take silence for that they don't have a point of view. Like, sometimes you have to make that effort to pull out that point of view. Yeah. And which is what, when a lot of leaders come from outside, they take time to kind of say, okay, if I'm leading a team which is based in Asia, I also have to unlearn and learn some of these things.
How do you coach them to stop having the mindset of waiting their turn?
Waiting their turn? Yeah. So the two things. One, I always tell people, before you go to a meeting, prepare. Because sometimes, like I said, sometimes, thinking on your feet could be difficult. Okay, if you haven't done that, or just kind of feeling nervous that, okay, will I say something in the spur of the moment, something that will not make sense? I always say, if you know you're going for an important meeting, have your notes ready. And not only have them ready, but practice saying them. Because just having them ready is part of it. But how are you going to say it? Right? And make sure, if you've written 3 notes, you've got to give yourself a target. And that's where coaching comes in. At least 2 of them, you've said that. So it's a very small thing, but till it becomes a habit. People always expect, oh, if it's a program or if it's a coaching thing, going to do like earth-shattering thing or like rocket science. No, it's these small habits, right, that people start to practice and it'll inculcate, and then they become a part of you.
So instead of waiting to be asked, make sure that you're prepared so you can actually contribute to the conversation that's happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So out of the 200 women that you interviewed, was there one story that really stood out to you?
There were many, but one I will say, because that stood out in the sense it shocked me, but it also made my resolve stronger. That the work I'm doing is worth it. And so the story is in the book too, is this leader. In fact, she came on my podcast too. So it's there publicly, and people can listen to her if they want. Was this leader, she was saying, and this was 2000s, it's not I'm not talking 80s, 90s, in 2000. She said she was there for a meeting. She was just getting ready. She had entered. She was waiting for her boss to come in. And somebody asked her to get coffee.
Oh no.
And they thought
I think everyone, so many women have gone through this.
Exactly. And this lady said that they said, "Oh, are you a PA?" So coffee was one. So there was one. And the other one, actually, I'm confusing too. Sorry. The other story was they were waiting for a meeting. She was going in with the boss. She was, a few leaders were just coming. This was like a board meeting. And one of the male leader asked her, "Hey, so are you a PA to so and so, her boss?" And she said, "No, I'm the VP strategy and I'm presenting." So
Interesting.
and the reason why I say this stood out for me because I would think they come out of scenes from 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. I mean, like not 2000.
No. So talking about where we're working now, and there's a lot of us talking about leading into 2030, and I'm really interested to know sort of your opinion on this, because we're working in an era of constant AI updates and disruption, automation, generational shifts in the workplace, global instability, and leaders are expected to work through all of this at a time where there's no playbook. Like a lot of things that are happening right now in the world, even to isolate it down to an individual business, hasn't really happened at the level or the volume of disruption that we're having at the moment, that leaders are having to work through, which is really destabilizing and stressful for leaders, I think.
Absolutely.
What's your advice for leaders to sort of work their way through this time?
2-3 things. In fact, last week I wrote a post on that, coming off onset, not even onset, but this flurry of AI, the automation, technology shifts, all of that. There's one thing that will never go out of fashion, will be communication. And when I say communication, it's how do you communicate with empathy? How do you communicate with, humility? How do you communicate with understanding of the other person, right? So I think the human skills are going to become even more important. I know there was a time where everybody wanted to be a techie. Everybody wants, like, it was all about tech, the new version, the new this, like, if you weren't doing that, or if you weren't talking that language, like you were not anything, right? But I think now more so than ever, these qualities about the communication piece I talked about. The other one is resilience or adaptability, whichever way you say. If you're a leader who can adapt, like today you make a plan and you're okay to say after a week, guys, I was wrong. This plan doesn't work now. I think you will succeed. If you're a leader who worked on 2 years and 3 years plan, I don't and not willing to like etch that in stone, you're going to really struggle. So really being adaptable and being on your toes and be okay to be wrong is the other thing that I'm telling leaders right now, that because it's a muscle. It's a muscle to be adaptable, and it's a muscle to say I could be wrong, which in the past we didn't expect our leaders to say, right? We expected our leaders to have all the answers.
Well, you had the time to do the research. I mean, you look at how we did 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Leaders had the time to do the research, and a project may have taken 3 or 4 months to get off the ground. Now that timeline could only be 3 or 4 weeks. You don't have the time to do that research, to back yourself in. And that's where, as you say, the agility piece becomes really critical. That's correct. To be able to shift and pivot and change as you go through that process.
Right. And that's that kind of it sits adjacent with humility, because you have to be agile, you and also have the humility to say, hey, I was wrong, let's just pivot.
Yeah. The 2 books you've written, which is the Leaders Blocks and the Rewrite the Rules, if we taking the lessons you've learned through those books and the people that you've spoken to and the experiences that you've observed, moving between now and 2030, which is really only 4 years and so many months away, it's actually not that far in time. What do you think that will look like in the environments that we are creating right now?
I'm a big believer, and that's also being a little old-fashioned, is that certain things will not change, right? Leaders Block that came out in 2019. It was before COVID. And the other day I was talking to somebody and they were saying, he said, Ritu, I went back to your book again. And it's funny how still a lot of things there are still relevant.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, that's good to hear. So that's 6 years. And I would say the examples may change because, the scenarios will change based in the next 4 or 5 years. But I think the book, the blocks, and what triggers the blocks are going to be very relevant still. The triggers in the book are all about, external triggers, internal triggers. All of those will still be very relevant. The specifics may change of what that trigger could be, right? Some of the leadership qualities will remain. The need to have confidence, the need to have humility, the need to be adaptable, the need to be visible, like everything that I write about in my second book, they are all going to be relevant. What, of course, is going to change is a lot of technical, the way the teams function, the way a leader is expected to lead, like more diverse, more remote, more intergenerational teams. That is going to change for sure. There's going to be more leaders leading those kind of teams than in the past. But I think the basic things are going to remain. And I firmly believe that.
You talk about perception reports, which is,
Mm-hmm.
the gap between how a leader sees themselves and how they're seen. What have you
Yeah.
learned about that?
Okay. I smile because it brings quite a few instances to my mind. So I use perception report as part of my coaching that I do, right? So let's say, for example, if I'm coaching you as a CEO of a company, if I'm coaching you, I will say, okay, Sadhna, give me 8 to 10 of your stakeholders who I can speak with. Okay. So you will give me, and it'll be a diverse group. So it could be some of your direct reports, some could be your peers, some could be, let's say, the board member or anybody. We'll pick about 10 people. And I have a conversation with all 10 of them. It's not a survey, it's a conversation, right? And I ask them, generally quite a few things that you're good at, things that you could work on, things that you can, but little pointed. And I also probe those people to give me a little bit more color on that. So a little bit more anecdote, episodes, instance. And once I've spoken to all 10, I kind of look for patterns or themes that, is there something that's coming out? 3 people have said something similar, or 5 people have said the same thing, or whatever, right? And based on all of that, those conversation, I create perception report. I look for 2-3 areas that you're really kind of, that came out good, bad, whatever. So 4-5 is what I focus on. Then I come and discuss that with you. And it's called a perception report because, you can deny it. You can say, no, all this is rubbish, but it's a perception, right?
How confronting is it in those conversations you have with the leaders at the time? Because it's yeah, it would be.
Yeah. And that's why sometimes I tell I prepare the leaders, I prime them beforehand that this is the exercise we're doing. How comfortable are you? Are you ready to think? You may not like what you may see or you may hear, things like that. So I do prepare them, but I also kind of say that, look, if we don't get to this 5 years down the line, this will become even bigger, or if you don't address it now, you're not going to become a better leader or whatever, right? So I kind of frame it in a way that it's a positive thing. Also, what I do when I receive all of these, I take out 2 sides. So both the extremes, right? If somebody said something really good, like 1 or 2 people, I take that out. Okay, you're a great leader, fair enough. But if 1 or 2 people have got really personal and have said things very episodic in nature, I'm like, I'll take that out. I kind of go in a bell curve. I look at that, the 70 in the middle. So I prepare the leader. Even then, I've had leaders, walking out of the room where we are working on, or like putting the report on the thing saying they don't know me, they don't understand a thing. And it's this, it's that. So there is reaction, which is also human, but it takes courage to kind of see what's coming up.
Yeah. So I'm interested to know, and I don't know whether you've had this experience or not, is when you're dealing with male and female leaders, you're doing a perception report on. And I believe that women are seen differently in that leadership role that men are.
Yeah.
They could behave in exactly the same way, but the woman is going to be seen differently.
Yeah.
How do you manage that? Not only with the people that you're speaking to, but the leader you're going back to as well.
Yes, that's a really good point, because when I speak to people and when I can sense that, they're saying, let's say they say, oh, she's very aggressive, for example, I'm just saying.
Or very direct.
I
she's very direct.
very direct. And then I point out, okay, give me incident. Like, can you give me examples? Can you give me things? And that's why perception, I tell people that's the value that I bring in. It's not like whatever people say, I write it down. Oh, she's very direct, so I'll write she's very direct. No, like I probe them, right? Because my thing is to get to the root cause. Like, what is that's a change that is required, and therefore the leader needed to be direct, or just because she was direct, like, whatever, right? So things like that. So I probe further. And that's why perception report takes time. I block 45 minutes with each leader whom I'm working with to kind of probe on some of these things. And I do apply that lens, is that when it's a women leader, I do say some of these things are coming out like this. And yeah, so that I manage
Yeah,
in terms
that's
of,
good to know. I
filtering.
mean,
Absolutely.
I think many female leaders have been in that spot where they've been labeled, and
Yeah,
then because they've been labeled by a senior person in the business, everybody else feels the right to use the label, whether or not that's the right
absolutely.
label to be used or not,
Exactly.
So, and
Yeah.
what's next for you? Have you got another book in the pipeline? What's next in your world?
Um, Not a book yet, because the book just came out last year. So I'm still the book is still doing well. So we're still making sure the book reaches more and more readers. But I'm focusing a lot on running women leadership programs. So I normally, and so far we've done a lot of what we call in-house. So we go to an organization and we run the program for them within their leaders. But now we are opening it up to saying, okay, you're an organization who has 2 leaders or 3 leaders. We want to send them to an open program. So we're kind of going down that path. Because we realize not every organization has 12 leaders who can go through the program internally, but they do have really smart women leaders they want to invest in. So we are open. So we're making it easy for them. So we're doing more of that. We are in fact launching our batch on 15th of October, and we've got leaders from 5 different companies already signed up for that across the region.
Awesome. And so I'm assuming it's a global run program, so you can do it, or do you have to be in the room?
No, yeah, it's online, so you can be from any part of the world, literally, as long as the timing works. And we kind of are keeping the timing for APAC. That's a good time zone. So we're covering leaders all the way from India to New Zealand and anything in between like that. So yeah.
Fantastic. Now, Ritu, we've come to the time in our podcast where we call the Spotlight Shuffle. We have 20 questions. If you're sitting in front of me, you'd pick a number from a bowl, but you're not. So I've got 20 questions. Pick a number and I will ask the question next that number.
Ooh, okay, that's like a Russian roulette now.
Correct.
Number 7.
Number 7. Okay. What's the hardest part of leadership no one talks about enough?
Oh, that it's not going to be great all days. Or you're going to be out. You'll struggle. I always say, it's a phrase. I think it's from Bible. I could be wrong. Heavy lies the head that wears the crown. Something to the effect.
Something like
Basically,
that.
yeah.
Yes, it is. Yep.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I said. Nobody talks about it. Everybody wants to be a leader, but they don't know the responsibility that comes with being a leader.
That is so true. They want the title, but they don't understand what the title entails until they get into it. And then they go, oh, I'm not sure I like
didn't know this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the next number? Actually, no, can I just I'm going to come back to that. If you are someone who's taken on a role and then you kind of go, oh my God, this is not what I expected it to be, what's your advice to them?
Okay, so look, depending on the organization context, I always ask them, okay, are you okay to give it 18 months, right? Like put a timeline. If after a few months you absolutely think you can't do it, then please go and talk to your leader, because then you're doing disservice to yourself and to the organization and to everybody, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, good advice. All right, the next number?
The next number would be 3.
Number 3. What's the most exciting possibility you see in the future of leadership or work?
The most exciting possibility I can say, for the way I'm thinking about it. So I have a teenage daughter, and she and me have talked about doing this whole thing on our podcast and all the series we do on women leaders rewrite. She and me are going to do the season 4 together.
Oh,
So
awesome.
the possibility of two, and that goes on to leadership thing, is intergenerational, working together, bringing the wisdom and experience, but also taking in what the youth is kind of going through and is feeling and how they lead the path. I think for me, that's the most exciting space where you can combine those two things.
Yeah. So I spoke to a young leader on this podcast, Scott Miller, and he runs a business called BOP, BOP.
Okay.
And he's young. He's a very young Gen Z leader. And one of the things that he talked about is the reverse mentoring. So, if you are an older leader who is someone young in your life that you're mentoring. And I was at a conference recently, it was 500 people in the room. And I asked the question, how many have you got a mentor under the age of 30 and not one hand went up.
Wow.
And so when we were going into a world where we've got, 5 to 7 generations coming into the workplace and you're leading an organization with that, that is probably one of the most critical things that you can do as a leader is to get a young mentor in your life.
I agree. And Sadhna, it's interesting. People are talking about it. In GE, we had this, even in those days, reverse mentoring was a thing. That the leaders would reach out to a younger leader and kind of work through some of the things, and I talk about that in Leaders Block too. So like I said, some of the things are going to be so relevant.
Okay, your next number?
4.
What leadership quality will matter even more in the next decade?
Empathy. I think empathy is going to be, it's hugely underrated. I remember reading and doing a lot of research on this was around COVID. And one of the things I realized about empathy is like, you typically think it's happening to that person. It's not going to happen to me, right? And then COVID was that thing where you realize, oh, it could happen to anybody.
Everybody. Yeah.
So I think gone are the days, or if you kind of are sitting in a bubble thinking, oh, it's not my word, it doesn't bother me, or it doesn't matter to me. I think that's the biggest mistake you're doing. And therefore, kind of having that empathy for anybody in any part of the world is going to be your biggest superpower as a leader.
All right, your last number.
Let's go with 15.
What's a small moment in your career that left a big impact on you, but rarely gets talked about?
When I was, this was way back in 2000, I think, very early manager. I had a small team, and, our promotion list came out and I wasn't promoted. I kind of decided to go home and just sulk a thing. And when I came back the next day, my manager told me that my team actually went up to him and they said that they were unhappy and disappointed that I hadn't got promoted. And my manager had never heard anything like that. Like they'd never had anybody's team come up and say, oh, why didn't our manager get promoted? And, I was so young that time, but that moment has stayed with me. So that was really
that's
special.
Amazing. Real reflection on what you were like as a leader.
That's correct.
That's because that really happens. The team goes up and says she needs the promotion.
Exactly. But that's only one side of the story. In the book, I talk about the other story that, how I was such a great leader, but how I also went through my first leader's block when my same team complained about me, saying they were not happy with me and they wanted to move out of my team. So I went from being this really superstar to this flop star, so and then what happened during that?
What changed? So, you went from not wanting, the team not wanting you to lead them to advocating for you.
Yeah.
How did you change?
What happened was when they when they went up and said they wanted me to get promoted and things like that, when they advocated for me, I was probably at the peak of whatever I was doing. In the next 4 or 5 years, I was still in the same role. I just had role fatigue. I was bored. Externally, my metrics were all green, but I was internally really bored. I was on autopilot. I didn't pay attention to the team. They felt that, they saw it. Probably I didn't realize. So it was that. And then that was a wake up moment when my manager said, hey, 2 of your team members don't want to be in your team. Okay.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there is a timeline, like, in roles and leadership roles, isn't there? It's that sort of 5-7 year timeline almost. And when you see leaders who've been in that roles for 10, 15 years, you kind of go, how are they keeping themselves relevant and energized every day in that role?
Exactly. Yes. And I that's another thing that comes up in coaching a lot. And when I work with executives is this, that, is your role, that's part of the letting go, that, you're in a role, you're fatigued, you're not enjoying your thing, but you're just holding on to it, right? Who is that serving and how long will it serve you?
Good questions.
So,
Congratulations on all of your success on the 2 books that you've written and the business that you have. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for making the time to be on our program.
No, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope your listeners are going to get something out of it.
If you like what you've heard, please share, rate and review this podcast. And don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. The producer of Future Fit Leadership is Mehrish Barone from Guide Your Light Network. If you would like to reach out to me, please DM me on any of my social media platforms. I'm available for speaking at conferences or consulting to your business. Future Fit is created in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives. If you'd like to join the community and receive a free takeaway each week, sign up to the Future Exchange app in my show notes. Thank you for having me in your space.
This is a Guide Your Light network production, creating podcasts with purpose.